120 bus captains infected with Covid-19 as the number of clusters involving bus interchanges jumps to 7. Sentenced to jail a woman who flew back from London and exposed others to the risk of infection. And we'll be speaking to Senior Minister of State for Manpower Zaki Mohamad about a pay hike for all lower wage workers. Good evening, you're watching The Big Story coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Haryanto Diman. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode. We begin with the latest on Singapore's COVID-19 situation. 120 bus captains have been infected with the virus and the number of clusters involving bus interchanges has grown to 7. According to the Land Transport Authority, the 3 newest clusters currently involve 9 bus captains in the Clementi interchange, 15 in the Jurong East interchange and 13 in the Boon Lay interchange. There are 4 other clusters involving bus captains at the Toa Payoh, Punggol, Bishan and Sengkang bus interchanges. And the outbreak has spread beyond bus captains to dozens of staff from these interchanges and their close contacts. Meanwhile, the Health Ministry last night reported a new cluster linked to a dormitory in Pioneer. There are currently 7 dorms with active clusters with 266 cases linked to them. Separately, 21 cases were added to the Bugis Junction cluster last night, bringing the number of cases in that cluster to 198. Separately, a woman who exposed others to the risk of infection after returning to Singapore from Britain last year was sentenced to 12 weeks jail today. Esther Tan Ling Ying was issued a stay-home notice upon her return and was told to go home immediately. But before heading home, she and her parents ate at a food court in Terminal 1, spending about 30 minutes there. They also took an MRT train to Clementi before Tan and her mother went to the clinic near their home. Tan then lied to the doctor about her travel history to get some medicine. For exposing others to the risk of infection, an offender can be jailed for up to 6 months and fined up to $10,000. A quick look at Singapore's vaccination progress. As at August 28th, 80% of the population have completed the full vaccination regimen, indicated by the orange line here, and 83% have received at least 1 dose. In his National Day rally speech last night, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong spoke about the need for Singapore to refocus on the future. Now, the COVID-19 outbreak has been brought under control. He covered many key issues, including a new law to ensure racial harmony, ensuring a fair playing field at the workplace, and improving the lot of lower wage workers. In just a moment, we'll be speaking to Zaki Mohamad, Senior Minister of State for Manpower, who is also Chairman of the Tripartite Workgroup on lower wage workers. Details of a pay hike have just been released for almost all lower wage workers in the next few years. This will be done through a major expansion of the existing progressive wage model. First, it will expand to new sectors: retail from September 1st, 2022, food services from March 1st, 2023, and waste management from 2023. Now, this will cover 28,000 or 10% of all full-time lower wage workers. Cleaners, security guards, landscape workers, and those in lift maintenance are currently covered by the model. Progressive wages will also cover specific occupations such as administrators and drivers across all sectors. Drivers will receive a minimum monthly base pay of $1,750, while administrators will get at least $1,500 each month from March 2023. This will cover 55,000 or 19% of all full-time lower wage workers. Welcome to The Big Story, Mr. Zaki. Now, lots to discuss today, so let's dive right in. Prime Minister Lee mentioned, the progressive wage model will be extended to cover retail, food services and waste management. These are sectors hit hard by the pandemic, but the scheme doesn't take effect until September 1st next year at the earliest, for the food retail sector at least. Why is it not any sooner, and what other forms of help are there in the meantime?
So actually, let me just take one step back. It's a very good question. But from the outset, we wanted to make sure that workers who are low wage workers who are cared for, and that we build an inclusive society here in Singapore. I think this is an important aspect. As where Singapore grows, prospers, you must make sure that every worker who works hard is also able to share the prosperity of the country. I think every worker matters to us. So I think it's important to also recognize that we've made progress over the years. So it's not that as though the low-wage workers have not seen wages grow. In fact, in the last 5 years, we've grown, their wages have grown by about 30% on average. And of course, if you're in the median, if you're in the PWM sectors, they've grown even faster. Yeah. So this is one way in which, I think we've been quite fortunate through our labour policies and PWMs in the past 5 years. We've been able to grow our wages faster than the median worker. And in Singapore, the median worker has also been growing over time. But I think this round, we are also very cognizant. This was something we actually planned early last year. So if you look at the budget speech we made in 2020, we wanted to expand the PWM, but because we were at the beginning of COVID, it was not right, I suppose, or I suppose it's very sensitive to try to force employers or to compel them to increase wages at this point. So I think to such extent, this is where our tripartite approach works, in which we work closely with employers to see what's reasonable, and we've met about 1,800 employers, workers, as well as the union members across the spectrum to see how best we can expand PWM in a sustainable way. Now, I mentioned that these are also typically, our low-wage workers are also typically vulnerable, because in this COVID-19 period, you've seen them in the front lines. Many still face hardships. Many also face situations where they can't do OT, or they are not called in for every day because we have heightened alerts. You have circuit breaker period too, in which they've seen their incomes impacted. So workfare has helped because we had a special payout last year, $3,000. But at the same time, I think what it has also compelled us to do is to really look and see how we can strengthen this social compact. And beyond just the PWs that we have today, cleaning, security, landscape, and lift and escalator, we want to make sure that this is sustainable and we can roll it out. And I'm quite heartened that the employees have come on board. But I can tell you this, that it's not been easy. If you talk to an employer in the food and beverage sector or the retail sector today, or even one from hospitality or one of the others, I think that the first reaction is we just recovered. So why don't you let me have a bit of time? And that's why PM also talked about how the government will come in to support them. Perhaps we are looking at transition measures where we can help them adopt progressive wages, pay their low-wage workers better, but at the same time as well, government coming to support midway so that we can bring the adoption forward. And then as the economy recovers, then we can taper it over time. But in 2 years, hopefully, our low-wage workers will see the benefits of progressive wages. In fact, under current PWM coverage, we have about 1 in 10 low-wage workers covered. We are moving that to 8 in 10 workers covered. And of course, if you include progressive wage mark, which we'll talk about later, that brings up 94%. So to a certain extent, I think, the moves, all the 18 recommendations are quite substantive to be able to help our low-wage workers progress sustainable manner. And I think what makes Singapore different is tripartite consensus. Because the employers agreed to this, the employers think that the moves are sustainable, they accept it. So we are also trying to help to make sure that those who are the most vulnerable do not become disemployed. That is one key worry we always had with this committee, in the sense that while trying to help our low-wage workers, will they inadvertently be disemployed because the wages go up too fast, employers don't agree with your recommendation, and therefore faster just to not hire low-wage workers. So this is one thing we have to really be careful. And I'm heartened that employees have come on board despite it being challenging times for many of them.
And we know as well that another key aspect of help for low-wage workers is the new PW scheme for specific occupations. The first workers to benefit would be administrators and drivers across all sectors, starting from March 1st, 2023. Mr. Zaki, help us understand why has the work group identified these two groups?
So we studied the different profiles. So we first started progressive wage model, it was by sectors. That has proven to be effective in the sense that we were able to negotiate between trade associations, groups of employers who can represent industry, who know what's going on, who know what can employers absorb. So for example, cleaning, most recently we announced, today they're earning about 1,200, 1,400. By 2029, about 7-8 years time, they will earn about $2,400 a month. Can you believe, for cleaners? We've done the same for landscape. We've done more actually for lift and escalator. That will go up to 3,000. So these are very good and meaningful wages. But the difference between this and say something like minimum wage is that the employees agreed to this. So they think it's bearable. They think the market can accept it. So therefore, we worked with them on this. The same goes with F&B and retail. We will get to those negotiations later on. So I will leave the unions and the employers to negotiate through while we leave them to do that. OPWs, or occupational progressive wage, are different because we also found that we have low-wage workers in jobs, right? That are disparate in many companies. so say, for example, you talk about drivers. Well, you have the big logistics firms. Those are easy because those have associations. But at the same time, you also have many firms with only 1 or 2 drivers, right? And some, are just doing, warehousing, logistics, and so forth. So these are, disparate, very hard to negotiate for, and so therefore we are experimenting with administrators and drivers how we can do this across the board and use certain levers that MOM has. So these are new steps for us, and therefore takes a bit of time. Just like PWM took us a few years to understand the impact before we could run and say, this can go, you can go accelerated growth. OPWs will also take the same form in the sense that we must first understand, after you do this, what's the implication? Is there job loss? Are there loopholes? Are there things that we didn't see? So it's always good to take implementation steps slowly. And over time, as you learn, then you can think about what else is new. But one thing that is clear from OPWs is that unlike just putting a salary minimum, you also want to make sure that we have the right skills. So we put in certain trainings that employers can take on board. We want to also encourage employers to think about how they can transform jobs, redesign them so that workers can be more productive and upskill them. So that, beyond just giving the workers better pay, the workers remain employed because they are in jobs and roles that are more relevant today, more digitally savvy. And even for drivers, there are also ways to upskill and be more productive and improve. So that will justify the higher wages, and employers will be able to bear this over time. So that's where we are at for now. We will announce more details in due course because I think negotiations will continue, and we will see how best to implement this.
I understand, of course, you said that these are still being studied and all that, and you talk about the difference. Just drivers, among drivers, there are differences, right? There is drivers with associations, and then there are drivers that are just on their own, 1 and 2. So would the drivers include, say, private hire car drivers, like your Grab drivers? And if they are not included, why is that?
So very good question, because so the drivers that we talk about are employees. Typically, they are on certain fixed remuneration. So you have a monthly drawing salary, and you might get overtime pay, or you might get certain allowances for driving more deliveries or hitting certain numbers. The difference between this and, say, private hire car drivers or the platform type drivers is that they are self-employees. So it's no different from, say, your tuition teacher, your property agent, your insurance agent, for example. They are remunerated based on the number of either trips they do or certain incentives. Just like a tuition teacher, and then you're paid depending on how many tuition classes you give, right? Or property agent, how many houses you sell. So a bit like that. So they are treated as self-employees. So as PM shared, to some sense, beyond just salaries, let's see, are there other areas? Because some of them have been affected. They've gone to accidents, not being covered by insurance, not being covered by health benefits. So these are areas in which we are studying. We don't have recommendations today because we just announced it. So give them a bit of time, just like our low-wage worker committee took us about 10 months to arrive here. But I think this is one challenge which we're going to try to make a difference in Singapore. And again, our tripartite approach, I think will work better. So if you can see, for example, in the US, for example, they tried it, legislation, pushback, and it's not going to be so productive every time you come out and you say policy and you force it down.
Right.
So I think with negotiation, we see how we can do better and find a middle ground between employers and, in this case, platforms and the riders. I think this is one way in which we can make a difference working together with the unions and the employers.
So on on the point of legislation, like other countries, is that something you reckon will be looked at?
We are not ruling out anything. So I think ultimately it's about how we come to that middle ground consensus first before we decide what's the best way. Of course, in Singapore we try. In terms of if we can do things, for example, like PWM.
Yeah.
We didn't need legislation. It was a way in which the employees and the union, NTUC, made agreements, and therefore we respect that as government, we adopt it.
Right.
So we can do this just like many Scandinavian countries, where you do not need to legislate minimum wage. You already have progressive wage models which have minimum wage ladders in them, and certain aspects in which we also put in other ladders, career ladders, progression ladders, so that employees not just see the bare minimum, but you are progressing each time and you will see wages rise over time. So that's why I think something like that could work, but at the same time, I said we don't always rule out legislation, but we have to also be balanced because as you've seen, how things work out elsewhere. Simply because once you put into legislation, you find that it becomes very rigid and it can be contested too, especially if you're imposing on someone and they actually have a right, because like I said, the position of these workers are very different from your regular employees.
Yeah,
so that is actually the basis and the difference.
Now, just rounding up our discussion for today, the other aspect, so apart from policies, apart from support from companies, the other aspect of support is also society as well.
Yes.
Society can play a more active role to support low-wage workers. What can we do?
So our vision has always been to build a fair and just society where everyone can enjoy the fruits of Singapore's growth. And this is no different in the sense that the government will continue to support employees and employers, but at the same time as employees support our workers, I think there's also a room for consumers, all of us, to do our part to society to build inclusiveness, support our low-wage workers, and support firms that pay our workers fairly. And that's why we have the PW mark that we are going to implement too. And the government will do its part in terms of procuring only from firms that have the PW mark, i.e. pay progressive wages. But I think as consumers, I hope this sets the benchmark and the signal too, that when you see a firm with a PW mark, please support it because your contributions help our low-wage workers directly.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Zaki, for setting aside time to speak with me and sharing insights into the support measures for lower wage workers. Now, I've been speaking with Senior Minister of State for Manpower and Chairman of the Tripartite Workgroup on lower wage workers, Zaki Muhammad. In other headlines, taxi and private hire car drivers will be able to continue delivering food and groceries until September 2022 in an extension of a trial that began in March last year. Senior Minister of State for Transport Amy Khor said today the trial has helped to supplement driver incomes, which have been hard hit as fewer people take rides during the pandemic. She added since the trial began, an average of about 17,500 taxi and private hire car drivers have carried out deliveries. According to mid-year statistics released by the police today, scam victims lost $168 million in the top 10 scam categories in the first 6 months of this year, a sharp spike from $63.5 million in the same period last year. This comes on the back of a 16% rise in the number of reported scam cases and an 11.2% hike in overall crime. The report stated loan scams had the highest number of reported cases among scam types, that is 1,243 cases. This is followed by e-commerce scams, 1,141 cases, and the third, investment scam and social media impersonation scam, tied at 1,054 cases. Now, if you haven't redeemed your Singapore Rediscovers vouchers yet, now's the time to do it. You can use your NRIC, National Service Identification Document, or Singapore Passport as proof of identity to redeem the vouchers at 34 community clubs or centres and residence committee centres across Singapore. Following heavy rain this morning, flash floods occurred in two areas, Hougang Avenue 8 and the Punggol Way Slip Road to the Tampines Expressway. Weather forecasters say that the public should brace themselves for heavier rains over the next 2 months due to the Indian Ocean Dipole entering a negative phase. Across the causeway, Malaysian Prime Minister Ismail Sabri Yaakob is under quarantine following a close contact with a Covid-19 patient, his office said in a statement today. It didn't state how long he would be in quarantine or whether he had been tested for the virus. Mr. Ismail's quarantine order came as his new cabinet ministers and deputy ministers were sworn in before the king at the National Palace earlier this afternoon. Now those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below. I'm Haryanto Diman. Join us tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.